Welcome to this session of the DoD Modernization Exchange. My guest is Scott Frohman, the head of defense programs for Google Public Sector. Scott, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Jason, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
As we continue our conversation at the DoD Modernization Exchange and talk about how DoD is continues to this journey, right? We always talk about the modernization effort is there's no start, there's no end. It's just a long journey, marathon, if you will. The thing we talk a lot about is security, and that's where I'm going to start with. The idea that DoD's networks are constantly under attack, DoD working with critical infrastructure providers, constantly under attack. How is DoD keeping up with that security piece? I'm sure zero trust, AI, all those good things will come in, but what are you starting to see from your DoD customers?
I see you're fully buzzword compliant, Jason. That's great.
We've passed the hype cycle, so I'm good now.
Yeah, well, so you put it really, really well. The DoD networks are under attack. They have been for a long time. It's not just DoD, it's the defense industrial base. It's all of us in the commercial world. And the challenge is only getting worse because the attacks are asymmetrical. And the reason I say that is because if you're an attacker, you have to find one hole. If you're a defender, you have to plug every single hole. And that's really hard. So there are a couple of ingredients that we at Google think are very important to effective cyber defense. One is your first buzzword, it's zero trust. And so what does that mean to us at Google? Zero trust is a couple of things. It's avoiding this hard shell mentality where you simply defend the perimeter and then you assume everything inside is safe. No, you actually have to recognize that once an attacker is inside, you have to defend everything on the inside. The second part of zero trust to us is context-aware access. So looking at all of the factors of somebody trying to access a service or an application and making an access decision based on that. So who is the person? How are they authenticated? What machine are they coming in on? What operating system are they coming in on? Where physically are they located? Like, are they in a part of the world that we might not want to let them in, whereas if they're in the US or the UK, for example, we might. So all those things together provide context-aware access. And I think a great example of this that we've done in partnership with the Department of Defense is a Defense Innovation Unit program called Secure Cloud Management, where they have taken all of these concepts to heart to providing their users access, zero trust-based access to SaaS-based applications. The second important ingredient in cyber is your second buzzword, it's AI. AI, we think at Google, has the power to restore symmetry to cyber defense. So we look at AI as getting after three different things: the threat, the toil, and the talent. So the threat's important because these threats are ever evolving. They're getting more and more complex, especially as the attackers use AI. Toil is important because there's just so much surface area to defend, and it's getting bigger and more complex every day. It's something we need to automate, use machines and AI to do. And the talent, hiring cyber is hard. I mean, I work for Google, like we feed people every day in the office. It's hard for us to hire cyber talent. Now think about any other company, think about your government agency. So AI helps elevate the skills of your cyber defenders, of the DoD cyber defenders. And then we've actually developed, you may have heard of this little thing called a large language model, that phenomenon. So we've developed a tuned one called SecLM, Security Language Model. And that's a deep interest in gaining adoption across the DoD as they look to use AI, generative AI, in fact, to defend the networks.
Let's take a half a step back. I want to go back. I love the idea of asymmetrical. We've been talking about this a long time where, defense is always hard because you have to be right all the time versus attackers only have to be right once. Zero trust is really starting to level that playing field. And let's walk about the role-based access authorities. How is that starting to work with DoD? What are you seeing from customers? Are they getting to the point where, okay, well, Scott has the read and write privileges for certain systems, but only read privileges in certain systems and no privileges to others? Are they getting to the point okay, so they have the who part maybe, but what about the where and the what and some of these other W's?
Yeah, so at the root of what I just heard in your question is a really important point as it relates to the Department of Defense. At Google, we have a homogeneous infrastructure, right? Everything is the same everywhere. And so we can do one little update and within minutes it's spread across millions of machines globally. The Department of Defense is a very heterogeneous environment. So they have this program that's using this computer, and this other program using this server, and this program using this application. And if you walk into a Defense Enterprise Computing Center, a DEC, a DoD data center, it's like you're in the land of the misfit toys. And not that it's misfit, but everything is different everywhere you look. And that's a really, really hard problem. Like I don't know that even the smartest minds at Google would know how to solve that problem. So the way the DoD is getting after it's actually pretty impressive. There is a zero trust portfolio management office in the DoD CIO, and they've established a set of controls. And if anybody who's listened to you or reads the publications knows, there's a set of controls, there's a basic, there's an advanced, and we're very proud to be a part of that. But that's how they're doing that, is looking at all these different controls for the different systems and saying that's how we're going to govern it. There's sort of an advanced level beyond that, though, which we think is important, and that is thinking of the external threats. It's using all the best of what industry has to offer in commercial threat analysis into Intel. So there's this amazing company called Mandiant, and we actually acquired them at Google. And this is an interesting detour because it's relevant here, but they're kind of like an intelligence agency. They have country desks, and they gather the best cyber defense, the best cyber intel, and there are people that think about, there's this country desk, that country desk, the countries that you'd expect that we would have, and they produce the world's finest threat intelligence. And so that's something the Department of Defense is using, so is with the intel community and federal government, by the way, civilian, to understand the threat surface as exists outside the DoD.
That's been the biggest change that I've seen over the last 15 years. It used to be the one-way push. Well, the government just takes. They never would give. And then they realized, well, we need to give because what we're seeing, you may be seeing, but if we don't share, you may not want to say anything, we may not want to say anything, and then no one says anything, and then there's an attack that happens that's successful and really impacts the banking industry, the financial services, right, the telecom or whatever. And zero trust plays into that. So going back to your initial point, is understanding where the threats are coming and how to ensure you're closing them down or at least making it much more difficult. Is the sharing of information having that impact you expect it to have with DoD? Or are they acting on it? Are they shutting down, hey, turn up the notch here because we're seeing a threat based on this sharing that's happening? It
absolutely is. There are actually multiple levels of that sharing. So the actual threat intelligence from this country, this threat, this APT, Fancy Bear, Cyber Bear, whatever, we were seeing reports, we're seeing specific impacts, specific things that were avoided because of their awareness of this commercial threat intel. But what's also really cool is the partnership at a more philosophical level. So Randy Resnick, who leads the Zero Trust Program Management or Portfolio Office, polled not just Google, but other major players in the security and AI space and said, hey, this is what we're thinking about for Zero Trust. What do you think about that? And it was just this wonderful collaboration that resulted in a standard that I don't think anybody views as harmful or bureaucratic or wasteful. Like, it's a really good set of principles, and they're doing a great job getting after certifying all the different surfaces to do that. What I have found, Jason, is that some of the best collaborations between industry and the Department of Defense, and this is my experience at Google and other places I've been, they're informal. And that's challenging because informality is a very different way of working than large programs and large organizations are used to, even Google. But the enduring security framework that the Intel community had, there were a number of commercial companies that participated in that. And it was just people could pick up the phone and say, this is happening real time, what are you seeing? Oh, well, at Google we see, a quarter to a third of the internet traffic, capital I on every given day, so it's easy to detect trends. But it was just this great back and forth. We learned from each other.
And I think that informality comes from trust.
Exactly.
And I think that's what's maybe not talked about enough, is that the industry to government trust when it comes to cybersecurity and the threats that come about is at I would say probably all-time high. And your example of kind of Randy pulling in the CSPs and others to say, hey, does this make sense for Zero Trust? We want to make sure we're not doing something that you're all going to go, what are you doing? We can't do this, or this doesn't make sense for these reasons. Randy's just spoke about a month ago, and it's fascinating with how much progress they're making. Yeah. We could talk about OT because that's their next area of focus, but let's move instead to the other one called AI, which is another one. You mentioned the 3 T's: threat, toil, talent. Let's start with, what are you starting to see more generally about how AI is being applied? I know all the 3 of those areas, but how is DoD using it, and what are the ways that they're addressing each of those kind of 3 T's?
Yeah, so the department's using AI in lots of ways. It went from years ago of commanders saying, I need this AI. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know, I need this AI. To, I understand the kinds of problems I should be solving with AI. I understand the requirements, like the data and the capabilities of using AI. And so some of the use cases, if we think about, I'll say basic AI. I'm going to differentiate basic AI and generative AI, generative being a little more new, like Gemini and other large language model capabilities. But basic AI is where the Department of Defense is getting after analyzing and understanding contracts, looking at policy, identifying policies that conflict and overlap. And it doesn't sound like such a big deal, but when we looked at the volume of policies that exist in just the Department of Defense, to say nothing about civilian, it was overwhelming. Like it was reams and reams of digital paper. And then automation, process automation, trying to automate some things in workflows, whether it's business related or mission related. I think the best example of a mission use case is going to be air logistics optimization. So the Defense Innovation Unit, in partnership with the Navy and the Air Force is involved as well, are looking after the problem of contested logistics. We have a lot of things that have to move around the globe, and we have the limitations of crew, limitations of aircraft, and there's a conflict, like a lot of last minute priorities. And there's a branch of AI called operations research that they use to get after that. And so that was a wonderful collaboration.
That's a great example when you talk about congested logistics. I've been doing a lot of reporting recently on the Army's efforts for next generation command and control. They're very much worried about, what happens if we can't connect back to the cloud, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
What if we can't? So how do we ensure we can get command and control from a local level and more broadly? I want to talk a little bit about the use of these basic AI tools, policies and contracts. It makes perfect sense. You're right, there's so much policies, there's so many contractual regulations. If you've ever read the Federal Acquisition Regulation, you know just how much there is in it. This is both saving time, it's an efficiency play, it's a cost play, but it's removing people from having to do this kind of drudgery, the mundane work. That's the other benefit that I think a lot of folks in DoD are starting to glom onto.
It is, and so we saw some early gains with the basic AI. Now let's talk about the next phase, which is this generative AI. So we can get after a lot more things, not just information gathering, but actually information processing. Not just answering questions, but suggesting and driving an analyst to the right conclusion that she may not otherwise know to look for. So if we look at actually a recently announced program that's happening in the Indo-PACOM theater, Thunder Forge, it's a Defense Innovation Unit program, that they're going to use generative AI, and it's a partnership with us and Scale and other partners to deliver mission insights, to do planning. And UCOM is signed on to that as well. Many of your listeners and your readers will have heard of Nipper GPT. That's another great example of generative AI, but more broadly available to all folks on NIPRNet, and I think CIPRNet's probably the next horizon to look at there. And so we're just familiar with it because we are the platform behind that capability.
There's a great story I heard just recently from the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA. They were looking at building something similar, an internal ChatGPT, and they had gotten wind of Nipper GPT, looked at the Air Force and said, no, we're done, we'll just use yours. And I was like, why don't you tell that story more? Because people think government gets this bad rap of always, you did the wheel, but I need this other wheel because our wheel's bigger than your wheel, or they want to always reinvent it, to my point. But it was such a great story for DISA to be like, nope, Air Force got it, let's just borrow it and then use it as we see fit.
What a great moment.
It was, and I think the guy looked at me like, why would I tell that story? What's the big deal? And I'm like, you don't understand. Let's talk a little bit about where's Gen AI going next? Where do you also see some opportunities for DoD to take advantage of it?
Well, at Google, we see a lot of AI. Wait a
minute, you do?
We actually do. We do. Just
a little bit.
Every minute of every day, we receive 500 hours of video uploaded into YouTube. Every minute of every day, we activate 1,000 Android devices. And every minute of every day, we receive 1.2 million photos uploaded. And so when you think about we have to use AI. We have to automate that. We can't have humans trying to deal with all of this volume and this veracity. But we also use AI to deliver the really cool features, like You're not a Google Photos user by any chance, are you?
Maybe.
All right. Well,
What am I supposed to say? Yes.
Well, if your answer was yes to that question,
All right.
then you would probably know the almost scary ability that Google Photos has to recognize people that you've tagged. So I still remember when I uploaded all the photos of my children, and my son was 13 years old at the time, and I tagged him, this is Ryan, and Google Photos recognized Ryan as a 6-month-old in a bouncy seat that was covering about a third of his face.
Wow.
Just the ability to do facial recognition. So AI is in all of the products, and that's why I say we definitely know AI, we spend a lot of time with it. But where it's headed, so generative AI is sort of all the rage now, but multimodal. So generative AI we think of as large language models. Multimodal says, well, what about imagery? What about video? What about different languages? What about data? What about all these different things that come in, if you think about an intelligence agency or a Department of Defense organization looking at different inputs to deliver insights across all the surface. Another is agentic AI. So that's just a fancy word that's a bigger version of the word agent. So it's an AI that does things for you, can execute. And we're thinking about slightly more complex tasks that require something doing things in series. And then the next foray beyond that is something that's in our research, and you can learn more about this on the sort of our DeepMind website is thinking. So thinking is a more advanced reasoning that an AI does, where it attacks and reattacks a problem and comes at it almost like a human brain. And so thinking parlays well into agentic AI. So Project Mariner, there's something that you all can do an internet search for Project Mariner. You'll see our DeepMind page, and you can learn about how we're bringing these two concepts to the web browsing experience. Super cool stuff.
I just recently heard about agentic AI. It was not a familiar term for me. I was at a conference, someone brought it up, and then I just did another panel, brought it up again. So that's the new buzzword? So we lost zero trust, we lost Gen AI, now it's going to be agentic AI is going to be the next, we got to wait for that hype cycle to come down.
It just might. Yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of the work, you mentioned the DIU case studies as an example, they're using the Google Cloud for that. So let's talk a little bit about cloud capabilities. It seems so passé now, everything's in the cloud, but we know DoD has a lot of on-premise data centers still. They're trying to move more applications to the cloud. There's two pieces of the cloud. There's continental United States, the stuff in the US, and obviously the stuff outside. Let's focus on maybe the CONUS cloud capabilities. What are you starting to see in terms of DoD's usage, and what are they asking for from you all?
So CONUS is exciting because all the best of what we can do in the DoD's accreditation standard, you've heard of the FedRAMP's version of the Impact Level 4, Impact Level 5. Those are the DoD accreditation regimes for commercial cloud. And so all of our data centers in the US can come to bear for that. That's actually different than other cloud providers. So let me not say this is a generality. This is a Google-specific thing. All of our data centers fit these standards. Sort of unique way that we solve the accreditation problem. But all these things of AI that we're talking about, the large language models, of course, all the basic cloud capabilities. I want to do compute. I want to do storage. We've built a pretty cool network over the years because we handle that giant percentage of internet traffic. We've got now where we have network-specific services that are available to the Department of Defense that use the entirety of that Google network. So that's a pretty exciting thing.
Let me jump in here, because one of the things when you talk about the DoD use of the cloud, it seems like, okay, we've been talking about cloud for quite a while. Are you starting to see different uses? Like, for instance, we know the Joint Warfighter Cloud Capability, JWCC, they had two kinds, right? They had the general purpose and fit for purpose. Are you starting to see more of that fit for purpose? Are you starting to see DoD really take okay, what do we really need this capability for? Is it to process the data? Is it to connect to databases? What are you starting to see? What are some of those trends?
We're still seeing a lot of I'll call them commodity questions, right? I need to, this database. I need these servers, for virtual machines. We're still seeing that, but we're seeing more and more people understand that the cloud, number one, can scale in ways that traditional DoD workloads and data centers can't. And number two, the capabilities, especially all the different aspects of AI that we're talking about, those are not available in traditional DoD infrastructure. And so it's like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem, a mission-oriented problem.
A lot of times DoD figure they took care of that infrastructure, right? They want to move to software. The most recent memo from OMB around FedRAMP, as an example, really had a big focus on software as a service. Are you starting to feel that pull now? Are you getting more questions about, hey, can we put this application in the system in the cloud and run it as a service, as a piece of software that we don't have to worry about updating? I'm sure you're partnering with lots of companies that have that software on the Google Cloud. Again, I go back to, is DoD starting to ask for that, or they're still okay? They're still focused on infrastructure more than anything else.
It's definitely both of those. And I would say that the genesis of your question, sort of moving something into the cloud, we're seeing a couple flavors of that. One is this is an existing DoD service, maybe like a lift and shift if that's the kind of thing you're thinking of. But also, I want to use my favorite software, whether that's from Palo Alto or Mongo, or a database, a security application. And so we are seeing those ISVs put their software in our cloud. So the DoD can say, I'm going to use this, but I want this software. Great. Google's a pretty open place. We have we're the origin point of a lot of open standards. So we kind of want the cloud to be whatever the department wants it to be. But that's resulted in a bunch of specific programs like helping the Air Force do a better job of training their pilots, having the Navy do identification of rust, of corrosion on subs. So this is combining traditional legacy workflows with modern capabilities like artificial intelligence, in particular vision AI for the ship rust detection algorithm, with all the data that exists in the Department of Defense that they're just moving into the cloud.
One of the big challenges we hear time and again with the cloud is the cost of moving data, the egress, ingress costs. How much is that coming up? Is DoD recognizing that, okay, maybe we want to leave some stuff on-prem, move some stuff to the cloud, but be able to connect those dots through APIs and the like? Are you seeing that discussion grow? Because I think what I've seen based on just talking to CIOs and such across all of government is they jumped into the cloud and then they go, oh, that was a little more expensive than we thought. Now we should pull it back. Oh, we don't really have the data centers anymore to do that. And they're in a little bit of a catch-22.
You're absolutely right. We're seeing this exact same thing. It's not just the data centers are gone, so I can't go back, but it's I had this idea and I was following all the things I thought I was supposed to follow. Multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, I wanted to do that. They're great concepts, they still are, and there's more and more support from Google and other large providers to do that. But the egress fees, they're big. I can't just pick up my data and move it from here to there. And by the way, if you've got a big complex program with a lot of data, that's a whole program in itself to pick up that data and move it. And so what we're doing, and I'm sure other companies are as well, but we're saying you can solve these challenges with these really unique capabilities, bespoke things that we've developed at Google without needing to move the data. So that API approach that you mentioned, that's the way to solve it. So put your data where it makes the most sense. And there's some programs like what CDAO is doing with their approach to data lakes. Bring it together either logically or physically where they can, whatever approach they need to take makes sense, but then leverage the best of industry to use, I want to do translation. Google has a great translation engine, et cetera.
Scott, we've hit upon security, AI, cloud, a lot of technology, but the technology is only a piece of it, right? It's the people, it's the process side. What else are you starting to see from DoD as it relates to what are they asking you for outside of the technology now? I'll preface this with, I know Google's a technology firm, but you do more than that too.
That's right. We have wonderful micro kitchens and foods and programs. It's interesting. We just clocked our 20th anniversary at Google supporting Department of Defense, which most people don't realize the company is actually older than 20 years. It was a very early venture that we did supporting DoD. About 2 years ago, we stood up this thing called Google Public Sector that we're really excited about. Google Public Sector focuses our investment, focuses our mission in supporting DoD and the rest of government. We have a facility clearance, we have an independent board. There's just a typical structure that you would have if you're really deep into DoD and IC work. And so our focus, the kinds of questions that we're answering range from the super scaled and operational problems like some of the ones that we've talked about, but there's also agencies that look a lot like Google. So DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they're 10x thinkers, much like we at Google are. And so there's been a number of partnerships that we've had with those really innovative organizations or those I'm not afraid to fail, I want to try and asking really, really big questions organizations that have been very fruitful for the mission that DARPA has.
Love the comparison to DARPA. It's one of those organizations that probably, again, doesn't get enough light shine on how much interesting work they're doing and the connections and partnerships they have across the defense industrial base. Scott, we're just about out of time. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to bring us back around. We've talked security, AI, we've talked cloud. What's the big message you want to make sure folks are left with about Google's work with the Defense Department and opportunities and where it's going next?
The intersection of innovation of the Department of Defense mission is real. It's getting bigger and more important to national security every day. As I said, Google's been here for over 20 years to support it. We're going to be here for the next 20 and many more after that. I want to come back just very briefly to a point on infrastructure that you made. Not only is CONUS so important, but OCONUS, delivering capability outside. IL4 says your data needs to be resident, your processing needs to be in the US. It's really important, and this is what Google and other cloud service providers are getting after, providing hardware capability outside the US.
Next year at the DoD Modernization Exchange, we'll have you back, and you'll talk about OCONUS Cloud, because that's growing. We see it with the Army, we know with Indo-PACOM and the like. But for this session of the DoD Modernization Exchange, we're out of time, Scott. So let me thank my guest. Scott Frohman is the head of defense programs for Google Public Sector. I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Modernization Exchange.